If you're listening right now, I've got a small favor to ask. Bold and Boutique is a show that we're building with care and intention. The reason we keep pouring energy into this is because of the people who choose to follow the show. So if you haven't already, would you mind hitting that follow button on Spotify? It's a small gesture, but it helps us so much. Let's get back to it.
In the last episode, we explored how research and especially quantitative perception testing can help you optimize character design based on real user data. And you touched upon the idea that once you start understanding what works, you can start to build scalable foundations, a shared design vocabulary that helps teams across different projects, products, or markets stay aligned, basically.
Yeah, so in most projects we are not just designing individual characters. We're doing an extensive research and design process where you collect learnings, formulate best practices, create reusable assets, define guidelines, etc., etc. And it's not just to align different teams, it's also to facilitate effective and efficient design work that scales. So you want to make sure that teams don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time, freeing up time for more meaningful, high-impact work.
I think a lot of people, when they hear the term design system, immediately picture like a brand style guide or a list of do's and don'ts. Logos, fonts, color codes, tone of voice, descriptions, whatever. But what you're describing seems to go much deeper. Can you explain the difference?
Yeah, so what you're describing, logos, fonts, etc., that's a style guide, not a design system. So it's such a common misunderstanding. A design system isn't just a static document full of brand rules. It's not a style guide. Guidelines can be part of the system, but many style guides and rules often only restrict work. And I believe like a good design system is meant to amplify and scale creative work. And when it's done right, a design system doesn't get in your way. It should handle the repetitive and the foundational work so teams can really focus on the meaningful, high-impact parts of like a character and persona design, for example. It's not about reinforcing things. It's about enabling consistency where it actually matters. So in other words, when you are creating a design system, you're creating a foundation that supports designers and researchers so they can move faster, make smarter decisions, and spend more time on innovation instead of reinventing solutions that already work or trying things that have already been explored.
And how would you define a design system focused on virtual character assistance and AI interactions?
So in this context, a design system is a centralized set of standards, components, research-backed guidelines that help teams constantly create AI personas and characters that align with brand values and user expectations. Unlike a standard design system, you often see it can include things like voice profiles with voice tone principles, for example, or personality trait metrics, or perceptual design insights, quantitative test components, expression libraries with voice libraries, performance benchmarks, speech data sets, speech data set standards, but also think about character usage frameworks, acoustic analysis tools, you name it. And besides all of that, it can also include case studies and components you'd find in a standard design system. It's basically the result of like all the testing, research, and iterations we've done, packed in a way that other teams can pick up and use effectively.
And just to clarify, when you say it's the result of testing, research, and iteration, um, is it basically a collection of things you and your team discovered along the way? Or is it more like an intentionally created design system, something based on broader conversations with stakeholders and other teams and use cases?
It's definitely not just a personal archive or a list of things that worked for our team. A real design system is intentionally created with the goal of being used by others. So, communication with other designers, researchers, developers, brand leads, you name it, anyone who will be using or contributing to the system is very important. You want to understand their workflows as well, their challenges, and what kind of guidance or assets would actually be helpful to them. I'm a big fan of user-centered design work. And so that's how I approach crafting a design system as well, with user needs, feedback loops, and adoption in mind.
But you can't talk to everyone, right? I mean, if you try to include everyone, every team, every opinion, you'd probably get stuck in endless meetings and alignment sessions. Um, so how do you manage that? Especially when you start to deal with conflicting input, design politics, or when people start pulling in different directions?
Yeah, that's definitely a real challenge. You can't include everyone in every decision. Or, I mean, you could, but you'd never get anything done. The key is to be intentional about who you involve and why and when. Early on, talk to a small group of highly relevant people, the ones closest to the work or the ones who've struggled with inconsistency before. That gives you like this high signal input without slowing you down. You're not aiming for like company-wide approval. You're building a useful, flexible foundation that others can contribute to and adopt over time.
And do design systems you've built all include like the same things, or do you work with a certain template or something?
No, not really. Like one of the biggest misconceptions is thinking a design system has to include a specific checklist of things. But it's not one size fits all. Every company needs something different to make it work. It's more of a spectrum from simple reusable visuals and sounds all the way to full systems that shape how teams build, collaborate, and grow, for example. Before we dive back in, a quick word from our partner. The easiest way to bring your podcast dreams to life is right here. I record the Bold and Boutique podcast at podcastproducties.nl in Amsterdam. You can look like this on screen in seconds, maybe even better. The team really focuses on the details so you can focus on your show. From lighting and sound to comfort, production, editing, sound design, and the vibe. They got you covered. It's a sleek, minimalistic podcast studio in Amsterdam that's now officially open. Park right beneath the building, prep in the dressing room, and it's showtime. Podcasting made effortless, powered by podcastproducties.nl. Back to the show.
So that means a design system can be something very, very small and lightweight, but it can also be something much more extensive and broad.
Yeah, some systems are super minimal, just a set of voice tone guidelines or a style guide for character behaviors with some reusable samples and user testing templates in a shared Figma file, for example. Others may involve code, governance models, perception research frameworks, design attributes, analysis toolkits, even training data pipelines.
And how do you explain the spectrum? I mean, it depends on the amount of resources available, probably.
That too, of course, but it mainly depends on the intended use, what the teams are working on right now, and where things are headed. You can imagine that if you're building a system for virtual characters, the needs can be totally different. A company focused on developing virtual tutors will need something very different from one aiming to leverage virtual characters for social media and marketing and storytelling. One might rely on frameworks for AI model training, perception research, user testing, and education principles, while the other is more about staying on brand, social media strategy, templates, and components for content design with an AI virtual character. Both are systems, but they live at different points on that spectrum.
So instead of asking, do we need a design system? Maybe the better question is, what kind of system do we need for what we're actually trying to do?
Exactly. And I'm not saying you need a design system for everything, but if you do see value in creating a design system, just remember that it's not about checking the box. It's about being intentional and recognizing that even a small system, purpose-built system, is still a design system if it helps you move faster, stay consistent, or reduce friction in your team.
Okay, so let's say someone is listening and they're convinced they want to build a system, a design system, but not just any system, one that supports creation and evolution of virtual characters and brand ambassadors. Um, where do you start? Where do you begin with something like that?
You begin by focusing on what's already working. Before building anything new, take inventory. What assets, knowledge, and patterns are already existing across your teams? A strong design system doesn't start with a wish list. It starts with this observation. Look at what's already being used consistently. What design elements, personality traits, or workflows are already being repeated or relied on across the teams. When it comes to virtual interactive characters, that might mean noticing how personality traits are expressed across different media, how voices are selected or synthesized, often using TTS, text to speech technology vendors like Amazon Poly, Google Cloud TTS, Cerence, 11 Labs, or Microsoft, and how certain character types are connecting well with your users and reinforcing your brand identity.
What exactly do you mean by TTS technology vendors?
TTS vendors are basically the industry leading providers of high quality synthetic voices. So these are the tools often used to create or prototype the voice of a virtual character, especially when scalability is important. I often work with global enterprises to select the best TTS vendor solutions for their specific needs.
And perhaps a little off topic, but why aren't you a TTS vendor, if you know what I'm saying?
You're asking why we don't just offer the same kind of voice tech as Microsoft or 11 Labs or Cerence. Well, that's actually the part of how we differentiate ourselves. Let me zoom in on voice tech for a second. A lot of brands come to us because they want to develop their own custom brand voice, but they don't know where to start, or they're not happy with the standard solutions and approaches of text-to-speech vendors, whose main product is the technology itself. Sure, they could use self-service platforms like Microsoft has or 11 Labs, or go to companies like Cerence and Google and build them custom from the ground up. But what we offer is something different, a way to work with experts who aren't tied to a single platform. We give clients strategic insights across technologies and help them build smart, scalable solutions without any conflict of interest. They partner with us for our process. We design custom brand voices and high-quality speech data sets, the kind that TTS vendors themselves use to train and deploy voice models. So in a way, we're bridging that gap between a client's vision and the TTS vendor's tech that brings it to life.
Okay, circling back to where to begin when you want to design a design system. So you recommend it beginning by focusing on what's already working, what's already deployed, like assets that are already working, knowledge that is useful, etc.
Yes. Do you remember we talked about foundational research in the earlier episodes? Like how we start by defining requirements, constraints, expectations, and analyzing existing brand content or character expressions before creating anything new. So that's the same mindset. Rather than starting from scratch, you're extracting what's already resonating and build from there. So you begin with the end in mind. That's actually a quote by Stephen Covey. By the way, he's the author of, among other things, and The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Could you delve a bit deeper into that? It sounds straightforward, but just to understand exactly what the quote means in the context.
Begin with the end in mind is, I think, the second habit he describes, if I'm not mistaken. And it's so simple. It's about clarity of purpose. Before you start any task, project, or even your day-to-day decisions, you should take a moment to really define what your ultimate goal is. What outcome do you want to achieve? Think of it like planning a trip. You wouldn't just start driving without knowing where you're headed. Beginning with the end in mind is about setting that destination first and then aligning your actions, choices, and resources to get you there efficiently and intentionally. In practice, it helps you to focus your energy on what really matters. Avoid distractions that don't move you towards your goal, and make better decisions because you're measuring them against like a clear purpose.
But Stephen Covey explains it like a personal mission statement to live by, right? In his book.
To me, it's not necessarily a personal mission statement to live by. I think it's just a good starting point for creating a focused and effective design system.
I see. So basically, it all starts with the end in mind, and you have to paint the picture.
Exactly. So the goal is to define success. You want to establish the strategic direction by providing the why, how, what, and who. The foundational work helps you to start with that or with the end in mind by clarifying what's needed to align teams and efforts effectively in a dynamic and complex organization. And I can't stress this enough because in large organizations where multiple teams, departments, and stakeholders are involved, it's incredibly easy for people to start pulling in different directions. And this becomes even more true when you're dealing with fast-moving opportunity enablers like AI technology, for example. So without clear alignment, things become fragmented quite quickly.
So when you talk about aligning action and getting everyone on the same page, you're really talking about ensuring everyone's working toward the same goals with clarity and purpose, right? And that's the keystone of building an effective design system.
Yes, I believe so. The keystone is a strong mission statement that is there to keep everyone aligned. So that's also the reason why company mission statements exist.
And in the kind of projects that you do, what's the difference between like the project statement, the design mission statement, and the general company mission statement, etc.?
Good question. They're not the same thing, but they should be tied together. Let me give you an example here. Let's say the mission statement of Ford is to help build a better world where every person is free to move and pursue their dreams. So the question that every team should ask themselves is, how do we contribute? How can our virtual character or brand ambassador help build a better world where every person is free to move and pursue their dreams? If you're building a design system, the question should be, how can our design system help build a better world where every person is free to move and pursue their dreams? You see, this is how you start to define your mission statement based on the company mission statement. And that's very important because you're hired to make the vision happen, not to create a vision from scratch. So when you're building a design system, you're obviously not inventing the company's mission from scratch. Instead, you're translating that existing mission into tools, patterns, and principles that help teams align and build consistently, efficiently, and at scale.
Okay, so as you said, when you're working on a virtual character or a brand ambassador and you're creating a design system to scale them, you're basically hired to make the vision happen, not to create it. But what happens when your idea of how to bring the vision to life doesn't align with how other teams interpret it?
Yeah, now we're getting into design politics, which in my view can be very challenging for teams. It's rarely black and white. You always need to stay open to new ideas. And I'm a really big believer in creating space for creativity to thrive. That said, not every opinion is aligned with the core purpose of the product. Sometimes what people suggest may actually pull the team away from the bigger vision. So it becomes a balance, staying open while also being anchored in purpose.
And how do you deal with such challenges?
In my experience, when it comes to design politics, the best defense is clarity. If the system is built on real research, real feedback, and real outcomes, it's a lot easier to justify than just saying, this is the new rule. You're not forcing opinions, you're showing people what works and what doesn't, and you're inviting them to build on that.
I feel like a lot of teams feel like there is, if there is disagreement, that the system is broken, right? But what you're saying is that disagreement or like new ideas may just as well enhance the system over time instead.
Yeah, and sometimes tension is part of the process. Tension doesn't mean failure, it means people care. But instead of reacting emotionally, we can treat disagreements as options to improve. It's basically feedback data. So why is there resistance? Is it emotional, contextual, strategic? That's how design politics and discussions lead to stronger systems that people actually want to use. Before we get back to it, here is something you might find interesting. Most brand identities were made for static screens and scheduled campaigns. But today, your brand is dynamic. It talks, it listens, it interacts. At Voice Branding, we help brands refresh for the AI era, rethinking everything from tone of voice to visual identity, so your brand still makes sense when it shows up inside a chatbot, a voice assistant, or a virtual space. If your brand was built for a different decade, maybe it's time for a redesign, one built for how the world actually works. Email me at phoebe@voicebranding.ai. That's PHOEBE@voicebranding.ai, and let's talk. And now let's continue the show.
I understand it's not about shutting down other perspectives.
Right. Design systems are like a shared map. Everyone should be able to use it and help draw it, but someone has to define the destination. And if a new idea gets you there faster or more beautifully, amazing, let's update the system. But if it pulls you into the woods, you've got to know when to say no.
Do you have any examples or stories that exemplify how design politics can be very challenging?
Naming characters or naming in general. People feel strongly about names, It can get weirdly intense. It sounds like a small thing, but it can turn into a huge deal because people get really attached to words and what they represent. At a big company I worked with, we were building this voice design system. We had all the pieces in place, components, guidelines, everything was looking great. But when it came time to pick a name, things got complicated. Even though we did user research and a whole process for naming, Different teams, different stakeholders wanted very different things than customers. In the end, all worked out fine, but it took way more time and energy than anyone expected.
Now, let's make things a little bit more concrete. So let's say you've created a design system for AI interactions at a global aviation company, something that operates in multiple markets, you know? How would a design system like this look in the context of, as I mentioned, AI interactions, for example, or virtual characters and voice-based experience? You know, this area. Can you give us some core building blocks?
Sure. So it can include components such as voice prompts, greeting scripts, fallback responses, confirmations, etc. But think about facial animations or expressions for reactions, surprise, joy, I'm listening, you name it. But also think about UX, UI, sound design, earcons, for voice-based interactions mainly. They're like these distinctive audio cues used in interfaces to communicate specific information or feedback to users. You can think of them like the audio equivalent of icons, for example. Additionally, you can think about reusable interaction flows or sequences that are often useful to include. Think about FAQ interaction patterns, clarifying loops. What do you do when a user intent is unclear? Error recovery patterns to manage the way to handle mistakes. Sometimes escalation, help routing patterns, or tone shift patterns, which is about adapting to the mood or the context or user preferences, etc., etc.
And can you explain the difference between, for example, components like voice prompts, fallback responses, and, for example, recovery patterns?
Think of components such as voice prompt fallback responses as modular building blocks. They are reusable assets that do one specific job and are used within patterns. So a fallback response can be a voice prompt component, a predefined message like, sorry, I didn't catch that, or could you say that in another way, or whatever. It's a reusable piece of voice content designed for a specific moment. Earcons or UX sound effects are also components because they can be used repeatedly across different flows or across different interactions. So, for example, a ding, like ding, or for like a confirmation, or like a buzz sound for error. But when we talk about patterns, we talk about combinations of components working together. For example, to solve an interaction problem like an error, you might want to predefine and use specific error recovery patterns, which are basically structured interaction flows that may include an error earcon, a fallback voice prompt, a clarifying question, and an option to escalate, or perhaps you might want the character to express a different emotion and speaking style using style tokens. It's a pattern because it's how components are orchestrated in a repeatable scenario.
Okay. And what else is included in a design system for AI characters and AI interaction?
Another one is tokens. They can be very useful. Design tokens are small, reusable design decisions that make up like a style. The token's value can be like one of several things, a color, a font, a measurement, etc.
Can you give an example and elaborate a bit more on this?
Sure. So for traditional design or visual designs, you might have tokens like primary color is kind of a hex code. Font size, small, 14px, right? In our context, tokens may define, for example, the foundational and reusable visual attributes of a character. Kind of like a visual DNA. So you could include tokens for colors, skin tone, outfit palette, hair, eye color, etc., or motions such as the default animation speed, or even for expressions like default smile angle or eyebrow position.
So tokens are primarily used for visual DNA of the character.
No, not necessarily. They can also be very useful for the character's audible DNA, if you know what I mean. So, what the character sounds like. For example, voice system tokens might include elements like voice tone friendly, which may be defined by an increased pitch of 2% and a slightly decreased speaking rate and a volume decreased to 80% or whatever. I'm just saying something, of course, but you get a bit the point.
Yeah, I do. I believe that tokens are very useful, especially if you want to, I don't know, update things, if you want to create something that is easy to maintain for efforts in the future.
Definitely, a design system should be built with flexibility in mind. So, if you're planning to evolve your designs or create new products in the future, especially as new features and innovations emerge, it's really crucial that this system can adapt without needing to start from scratch.
I have another question. So, how is that system that we've been talking about actually useful for like local teams who might be working with totally different audiences, if you get what I'm saying?
Well, for example, local design and branding or marketing leads could utilize the design system to create a voice for a virtual brand character in their own language. The design system gives them guidance, templates, and best practices for the design and development that enables personalization while remaining cohesive and consistent with the global brand strategy.
But wouldn't voice guidelines or like best practices from one region maybe fall flat, like or even like backfire in another because of cultural differences and that kind of stuff? I mean, what feels warm and trustworthy in one language might come across as something completely different or even inappropriate in another.
Oh, of course. I'm not saying local teams should just copy what worked in another region. They could if it fits, but it's more powerful when the system helps them to ask the right questions and follow the right process rather just follow a fixed answer. So instead of saying use this voice, the system might offer research templates, reference benchmarks, or a vocal analysis tool that helps local teams define what on brand sounds like in their context, in their market, in their language. Like I said, that's the value of a system. It's not a script, it's a structured approach that scales insights while considering cultural nuance. There's a lot of interest in AI characters. Are your teams ready to deliver? I train teams on designing and exploiting virtual AI characters, influencers, brand spokespersons, and assistants implemented in AI-driven solutions. I talk about strategy, creating design systems, user perception, style, visual, and audible design. If you are interested, review our courses and programs on boldandboutique.com. From intro workshops to 5-day bootcamps, I help product leaders, designers, and aspiring professionals build expressive, scalable AI personalities for brands they serve. Thanks for listening. My name is Phoebe. More in the next episode.